James was the type of guy who cherished his weekends spent grilling in the backyard. His home sat in a serene suburban neighborhood, surrounded by neatly trimmed lawns and houses that looked like they belonged in a magazine. The atmosphere was refreshing, the skies typically bright, and weekends felt like a call to fire up the grill, enjoy a cold drink, and share some laughter with friends and family. He dedicated the entire week to planning his barbecue, choosing the finest cuts of meat, experimenting with marinades, and ensuring every detail was perfect. This would be the season's inaugural barbecue, and James was excited to reconnect with his friends and create lasting memories. As he set up the grill, the mouth-watering scent of sizzling burgers, steaks, and hot dogs filled the air. Everything seemed to be going smoothly until Clara, the new neighbor, moved in next door. She had just relocated from the city, and James immediately noticed her arrival. Dressed in a flowery dress, she seemed to carry boxes with an air of confidence, as if she believed she could change the world with every movement. He greeted her and introduced himself, but her response was tepid. She gave a polite smile but didn't attempt to engage any further. In the weeks that followed, James became more aware of her. Clara was no ordinary neighbor. She stood out as a passionate vegan activist, always eager to discuss the downsides of eating animal products. It wasn't simply that she chose tofu over chicken or almond milk over cow's milk. No, Clara took her stance very seriously. Whenever James fired up his grill, he'd catch sight of her in her backyard, arms crossed, casting a disapproving glare at the smoke billowing from his grill. Occasionally she'd stroll by and mutter something about harming the environment or slaughtering innocent animals. Initially, James attempted to shrug it off. After all, everyone had their eccentricities, right? But it became increasingly obvious that Clara wasn't going to quietly boil over. One day, as he wrapped up a barbecue, she knocked on his door. When he opened it, she was there with a pamphlet, nearly shoving it into his hands, insisting he stop contributing to the planet's destruction and adopt a cruelty-free lifestyle. He endeavored to remain courteous, but she continued to lecture him about the unsustainable nature of meat consumption and framed it as a moral obligation to stop eating animals. After awkwardly nodding for several minutes, he eventually closed the door, hoping that would be the end of it. But a week later, Clara sent him a carefully typed and folded note. It was a lengthy message encouraging him to rethink his choices, accompanied by a collection of vegan recipes. "A compassionate lifestyle begins at home," it declared. At this point, James was left wondering whether Clara's enthusiasm for healthy living was just that, or if it had spiraled into full-blown fixation on his barbecuing ways. He had always been considerate and even toyed with the idea of serving her a veggie burger at one stage, but this felt more like an unwanted campaign against his culinary choices. It didn't take long for Clara to escalate her efforts. She put together an eco-friendly cookout in the neighborhood, inviting everyone to sample vegan dishes and attend a talk on the perks of a plant-based diet. Of course, she made it a point to personally invite James, including a note nudging him to reconsider his dietary decisions. He could feel the mounting tension in the air. Clara's reputation as the vegan in the neighborhood was well known, and it was accepted that she'd likely attempt to sway you to her side if you ever met her gaze. Suddenly, James's barbecue felt less like a social event and more like a showdown between opposing ideologies, at least as far as Clara was concerned. Still, he wasn't about to back down. When barbecue day finally arrived, he went all in. He had invited friends, several neighbors, and even some family members eager to meet the new folks next door. He hadn't anticipated Clara's attendance. After all, he extended an open invite. Come if you feel like it. He just wanted to enjoy a relaxing afternoon, but as he lit up the grill, Clara approached, standing at the fence and watching him. For a split second he hoped she might keep quiet and give him a break this time, but that wasn't the case. Her disapproval was palpable. The moment she locked eyes with him, she strode over, arms crossed, and face set in stern disapproval. "I can't believe you're still doing this," she exclaimed. "Do you really not care about the environment?" James, making an effort to stay calm, smiled. "I'm just grilling some food, Clara. It's not personal." "Oh, it's personal," she snapped back. You're contributing to the destruction of the planet. It's not just about food, it's about your values. If you truly cared about the earth, you wouldn't be grilling meat." Her tone mixed anger with a sense of righteousness. Meanwhile, his friends who were enjoying the barbecue exchanged uneasy looks. James wanted to keep the peace, but Clara clearly intended to make her stance known. She ensured that her voice was heard by loudly declaring that consuming meat constituted a moral failing, asserting that anyone who engaged in such practices was contributing to environmental harm. Just as James was about to extend an olive branch by offering her one of his expertly grilled veggie burgers, she approached the grill, seized the tongs, and began discarding his meticulously prepared burgers into the trash. "This is wrong," she muttered repeatedly, clearly prioritizing her message over any semblance of civil discourse. The guests were left in stunned silence. Some shifted uncomfortably, uncertain whether to intervene or to ignore the unfolding scene. The atmosphere grew tense, and James recognized that the situation had escalated far beyond a mere disagreement. This conflict transcended the issue of food. Yet, Clara was not done. She fixed James with a fierce glare and, in a voice that resonated throughout the yard, warned, "You will regret this." Her ominous words lingered in the air, and as she stormed away, leaving the barbecue in disarray, James had no inkling of how prophetic her statement would prove to be. The mood at the barbecue had undergone a significant transformation. What had begun as a convivial gathering now felt like a precarious situation. James endeavored to maintain his composure, but Clara's outburst had left an unpleasant residue in the atmosphere. He contemplated ending the event prematurely, sending everyone home to prevent further conflict. However, despite his desire for tranquility, he was unwilling to allow Clara to dictate the dynamics of his own gathering. Guests attempted to restore the mood, offering half-hearted remarks about the quality of the food, even though it had been tainted by Clara's unexpected outburst. Nevertheless, James could not shake the sense that something more significant was on the horizon. It felt akin to the stillness before a storm. As he turned another burger on the grill, James caught sight of Clara once more. She stood by the fence, her expression one of complete contempt, arms tightly crossed over her chest. However, there was a noticeable shift in her demeanor this time. The air was thick with tension, and an unsettling sensation began to creep up James's spine. Suddenly, Clara strode across the lawn with swift, determined steps. The lively conversation around the barbecue fell silent, and the other guests observed her approach with bated breath, her face a portrait of rage. "I told you," she said, her voice low and menacing as she neared him, "you will regret this. You cannot behave this way in front of everyone and act as if it is acceptable. Do you think this is merely about food? It is far more significant than that. You are harming the planet." Her words struck like arrows, and James felt a tightening in his stomach. This was not merely a fervent appeal, it was deeply personal. Clara's anger extended beyond the barbecue. It was directed at him for living in a manner she found objectionable. "Clara, I understand your passion for your beliefs," James replied, attempting to ease the tension. "But this is my backyard. If you disapprove, you are not obligated to stay. I am not trying to impose anything on you." Clara, however, was unyielding. Her face was flushed with indignation as she leaned in closer. "You fail to comprehend, James. You are part of the issue. Individuals like you contribute to what is wrong with the world." Her words struck deeper than they should have. James was unaccustomed to such an assault, particularly from a neighbor he barely knew. He endeavored to maintain his composure, yet his frustration began to rise. "I'm just grilling some food for my friends," he said, maintaining his calm demeanor, while feeling his patience wearing thin. "This is a social gathering, Clara. What's wrong with enjoying some food and having a good time?" Clara didn't seem swayed by his reasoning. She stepped closer, her expression intense. "You really don't get it, do you? Each burger you cook is a step towards poisoning the earth." "You're part of the problem, James. I thought you were better than this." James felt a tightness in his jaw. He was exhausted by all of this, exhausted from the lectures and Clara's insistence on holding the moral high ground. He just wanted to have a good time with his friends, but she was determined to spoil it. "Clara, you need to calm down," he said, trying to keep his tone steady. "This isn't the place for this. You're making everyone uncomfortable." For a moment, it seemed like she might relent. She stood there, her intense gaze fixed on him, lips pressed together tightly. But then, without warning, she lunged forward and snatched the tongs from his hand. "What are you doing?" James asked, alarm creeping into his voice. Clara didn't respond. Instead, she began pulling the perfectly grilled steaks, burgers, and sausages off the grill, flinging them into the trash with exaggerated motions. "This is wrong. I'm saving you from your ignorance." The guests stared, rooted to the spot, caught off guard by the sudden turn of events. Some had already felt uneasy about Clara's earlier outbursts, but now it was clear the situation had escalated far beyond a simple disagreement. Clara wasn't just expressing her opinion anymore. She was taking action, and she wasn't about to stop. "Clara, stop it," James said, his voice now firm, tension churning in his chest. He didn't know if he felt more angry or bewildered, but one thing was unmistakable. This was not going to end well if it continued. Clara remained undeterred, consumed by a fervor as she discarded the food into the trash, as if on a crusade to eliminate James's malevolent influence. "Do you believe you can continue this behavior without consequence? Do you think it is acceptable to poison the world? I am ensuring that you can no longer turn a blind eye to the reality." James inhaled deeply, striving to manage his rising frustration. This situation was spiraling out of control, and he refused to allow it to jeopardize everything he had worked for. "Clara," he said, advancing cautiously, attempting to maintain his composure, "you must leave immediately. This is my barbecue, and if you disapprove, you are free to leave." Clara paused, her breath quickening, her chest rising and falling rapidly. Then, with a contemptuous expression, she retorted, "You will come to regret this, James. You will see. Individuals, like you always do." Just as James was about to walk away, Clara made a swift, unexpected movement, retrieving a small handgun from her bag. The atmosphere became tense, and a chilling silence enveloped the crowd. "What on earth?" someone murmured, yet no one dared to move. Clara aimed the gun, and James felt his heart stop. For a brief moment, everything fell silent. His mind struggled to comprehend the unfolding events. "I am fighting for the planet," Clara declared in a low, menacing voice. "You will realize the truth when it is too late." Before anyone had the chance to respond, Clara discharged the firearm into the air. The deafening sound reverberated, causing widespread panic among the crowd. People screamed and sought refuge wherever they could. James staggered backward, his heart pounding, uncertain of his next move. What had started as a relaxed barbecue had transformed into a perilous situation in mere moments. Just as the turmoil erupted, an unexpected figure emerged. John, the retired police officer from down the street, had been observing the unfolding chaos from a distance. Upon noticing the gun in Clara's possession, he acted without hesitation. He rushed towards her and tackled her to the ground, dislodging the weapon from her grasp. The gun discharged once more, this time a stray bullet grazing James's arm. The pain was immediate, yet his shock overshadowed it. Blood began to seep down his sleeve, but his thoughts were consumed by the surreal nature of the incident. John successfully restrained Clara, holding her down as the other guests hurried to assist. The police were summoned without delay, and Clara was taken into custody, still proclaiming her intentions to save the planet. Meanwhile, James, disoriented and still processing the unfolding events, was transported to the hospital for treatment. As he sat in the emergency room, his thoughts raced, reflecting on how a simple barbecue could devolve into such a nightmare. He struggled to comprehend how a neighborhood dispute had escalated so rapidly. However, one thing was certain: the day of his backyard barbecue would forever be etched in his memory. The subsequent days blurred into a series of hospital visits, media interviews, and countless phone calls. James had never anticipated that a seemingly ordinary neighborhood barbecue would escalate into an event that would capture public attention. While his physical injuries healed more swiftly than his mental state, he found himself grappling with deeper emotional scars. The minor graze from the stray bullet was a mere inconvenience compared to the turmoil within. Emotionally, he felt as though he had been fragmented. Although the physical pain subsided quickly, the psychological impact of the incident lingered, proving far more challenging to overcome. He found himself incessantly revisiting Clara's actions in his mind. The intensity of her gaze as she threatened him, the sharp sound of the gunshot, and the ensuing chaos were all etched into his memory. He was not merely shaken by the bullet. The realization that a neighbor, someone he hardly knew, could spiral into such violence left him questioning far more than his social gatherings. In the week following the incident, he isolated himself at home, uncertain of how to proceed. His friends and neighbors reached out, offering their support and checking on his well-being. John, a former police officer, was the first to visit him after his release from the hospital. He brought simple food, just sandwiches, and spent a considerable amount of time with James, engaging in conversation about various topics, both significant and trivial. It was the first time James had someone by his side who didn't pry or offer unwanted opinions. It was simply a comforting silence. John had his unique way of processing things. The two of them sat on the porch for hours, reflecting on the incident, how it could have been prevented and what steps they could take to move forward. "Sometimes," John said, his tone calm yet contemplative, "you just don't see it coming. One moment everything feels normal, and the next, you're caught up in something you never anticipated. But you deal with it. You learn." James nodded, feeling a mix of emotions. It wasn't only about the barbecue. It wasn't solely about Clara's radical views. It was about the fragility of life, how one person's actions could dramatically alter the lives of others. That realization stirred anxiety within him, but it also fueled his desire to reclaim some semblance of normality. In the weeks that followed, James became more introspective. His blog, which had mainly been a space for sharing cooking tips and personal stories, transformed into an outlet for his thoughts. His first post after the incident was titled, "The Day the Barbecue Almost Killed Me." It encompassed more than just the shooting. It delved into everything that had culminated in that moment. He wrote about how a serene afternoon could be shattered by the anger of another. He addressed the perils of extremism, illustrating how a simple gathering could escalate into a clash of beliefs. The post resonated widely, going viral. "Everyone has their own line," he penned, "but when your line becomes a weapon, that's when it crosses a line. We need to break free from our echo chambers and work toward finding common ground again." The reaction to his statements was intense. Some expressed their support, thanking him for his courage to voice his thoughts, while others challenged him for lacking a broader perspective. A handful even suggested he should have sided with Clara and embraced a plant-based lifestyle. Despite the ongoing controversy, James felt at peace. As summer progressed, life in the neighborhood began to stabilize. Clara remained in jail, awaiting trial for assault with a deadly weapon, and the future was uncertain. Meanwhile, Clara's online following surged as some began to see her as a martyr for the cause. However, in the neighborhood, the once vocal vegan activist faded from discussions. Residents were engaged in the process of moving on, working to restore the community spirit that had been shaken. For James, recovery, both physical and emotional, was his primary focus. He immersed himself in work, organizing smaller gatherings with friends and family to reclaim a sense of the carefree days prior to the incident. The familiar aroma of grilling, once a source of happiness, now lingered as a reminder of all that had transpired. It took a while, but eventually he found himself back in his backyard, ready to grill once more. The first time he lit the grill, the scent of cooking. Meat wafted through the air, but this time felt different. There was a lack of tension and drama. Only the sound of the grill crackling and laughter from friends filled the atmosphere. John was there, along with several neighbors who had reached out to support him. They had all come together post-incident, recognizing that something positive could emerge from such turmoil. the chance to rebuild their community, both physically and emotionally. The barbecue transformed into more than just a meal. It stood as a testament to resilience, a way to reclaim what had nearly been lost. Emily, the neighbor who had fervently supported Clara's vegan lifestyle, also attended. A few weeks prior, she had privately contacted James to apologize for not stepping in sooner, admitting Clara had crossed a line. While she was unsure about returning to regular meat consumption, she had chosen a more balanced mindset, one that didn't vilify others for their food choices. "You're not what you eat," she remarked as she settled down with a plate of grilled vegetables and a burger. "It's who you are and how you treat others that matters." That conversation resonated deeply with James. It reminded him that the issues at hand extended beyond food. He found himself grappling with the idea of balance, realizing that everyone had their individual journeys to navigate. Thoughts of Clara crossed his mind, reflecting on how her intense beliefs had wreaked havoc around her. It struck him that sometimes the loudest voices were the ones most resistant to understanding others. A month later, Clara's open letter from jail arrived. It was an apology, but it also served as her attempt to defend herself. She detailed how her fervor for environmental causes had overshadowed her better judgment. In her letter, she acknowledged that violence was never justified, yet insisted she was battling for a cause larger than herself. As James read her words in silence, a storm of emotions brewed within him. Sympathy washed over him, but it was quickly shadowed by anger at the pain her actions had inflicted on so many. He made the decision to visit her in prison, not for revenge, but to seek some kind of resolution for himself. Their meeting was laden with tension. Clara seemed transformed, fragile, remorseful, yet still holding on to her beliefs. "I'm sorry," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper, her eyes red and puffy from tears. I let my anger take control. I shouldn't have acted like that." James absorbed her words, but understood that no amount of explanation could erase the past. Yet he felt the anger within him dissipate. "It's done," he said, his tone steady and resolute. "We can't rewrite history, but we have the power to choose how we move forward." Following that visit, Clara's trial unfolded. But contrary to the sensational narratives often spun by the media, it was a subdued and somber affair. Ultimately, she received a sentence that included probation, community service, and mandatory anger management classes. James never crossed paths with her again, but in truth, he didn't need to.